This is the most hardcore cop on Korean screens. He has an unshakable belief that the only way to conquer evil is through violence. Today, he and his partner went to a karaoke bar to arrest a drug lord. Knowing that if caught, he'd be behind bars for a long time, the drug lord resisted fiercely. The two struggled on the rooftop for a while, and finally, the cop managed to subdue him. However, the drug lord didn't show any fear. On the contrary, he even flashed a sinister smile. Remembering a few days earlier when his partner had his ankle broken by this very man while defenseless, the cop's eyes turned cold, and he immediately planted a bullet in the drug lord's leg. After each such ruthless act, he would be reprimanded by the police department. But that was just for show, to comply with the rules. Deep down, everyone admired him for leading the team in solving numerous cases, big and small, across the city. However, who would have thought that one day, a case would truly challenge this talented cop named Kyung, pushing him into a dangerous situation that threatened his own life? One evening, after Kyung had dinner with his colleagues, someone secretly followed him without his knowledge. As Kyung stepped into a public restroom, he received a text message from an unknown number, asking him to go to the subway station to receive a mission at 7:30 a.m. on the 26th. Initially, he was hesitant, but when he saw the numbers 18,820 at the end of the message, which signified a cry for help, he immediately tried calling the strange number and his friend's number but couldn't reach either of them. Left with no choice, he decided to use the restroom first and think later. Suddenly, a man emerged from behind, covering his head, followed by another accomplice who knocked him unconscious. His memories afterward became hazy. He only vaguely remembered someone continuously injecting a strange liquid into him. When he woke up, he saw his colleague's face right before his eyes. They were deep inside the subway station. According to his colleague, Kyung had been missing for 2 days. Last night, he suddenly received a text message from Kyung, asking him to pick him up with the numbers 1882 at the end of the message. It was currently 7:20 a.m. on the 26th. Thinking about this, Kyung tried to stand up, but his legs were still very weak. But he didn't have time to ponder why he was so weak because the subway had just arrived. He hurriedly stepped onto the train, his head still dizzy. However, as soon as he stood firm, the girl opposite him suddenly became tense. When she saw Kyung looking at her, she clutched her bag even tighter, then hurriedly got off the train. Seeing this, Kyung could only observe silently. Finally, when the train stopped, he saw the girl bump into a man and hand him the bag. With years of experience fighting drug crimes, Kyung immediately sensed something unusual. He and his partner quickly chased after the two, but the man had already fled before Kyung could get close. However, as he ran up the stairs, he accidentally bumped into a passerby, and the black package inside the bag fell out. Seeing that Kyung was closing in, he reluctantly left the package behind. Kyung hastily asked the passerby to take the package to the police station while he continued his pursuit. However, what surprised him was that his robust body felt nauseous after just a few minutes of running, forcing him to kneel down and vomit. This delay allowed the distance between them to widen. Fortunately, Kyung was very familiar with this area. He immediately took a shortcut, intercepting the man at an alley. But by now, his body was too weak to fight back. During the struggle, he was not only robbed of his gun but also knocked unconscious. When he woke up in the courtyard, the man was nowhere to be seen. The landlady said the man had taken his gun. It's important to know that for a criminal police officer equipped with a firearm, losing one's gun is a grave mistake. Kyung immediately decided to conceal the loss of his gun and told the landlady not to tell anyone. However, once a lie begins, it leads to bigger lies. So when he discovered a drug on him while riding in a taxi, he decided to hide the fact that he had gone missing. As a result, he soon received a video. Opening the video, the protagonist was none other than himself. But in the video, he was like an animal, kneeling and begging, shaking his head and wagging his tail for a drug. After taking the drug, he even displayed a zombie-like smile, sending chills down anyone's spine. Finally, Kyung understood why he was so weak. He hurried back to the police station and rummaged through everything in his office while everyone was away. Just 2 days ago, he had been praised and hailed as the city's anti-drug hero. Yet, now he was framed as an addict and couldn't explain himself because of the missing gun. The only solution now was to recover his gun. He planned to go to the hospital and find the drug lord whose leg he had broken to interrogate him for clues. But after a morning of running around, his addiction started to kick in. Fortunately, a taxi appeared just in time. He could only use his last bit of reason to get into the car. After telling the driver his destination, he completely lost consciousness. When he woke up, he found himself lying on a hospital bed. But when he saw the IV drip on his arm, he immediately knew something was wrong. Once his blood sample was tested and found to contain drugs, his career would be ruined. Thinking about this, he started following the nurse carrying his blood sample. After seeing the sample's final destination, he rushed inside. After locking the door, he frantically searched for his blood sample. However, figuring out how to hide it was another issue because there was no sink or drain in sight. Left with no choice, he drank the entire bottle of syrup and then hastily took out his drug, intending to use it. But as he was about to pick up the drug, he suddenly remembered the image of himself in the video, then recalled his past glory. His last shred of reason triumphed over his addiction. He used all his strength to crush the drug, then crushed it again before rushing out the door just as the security guard burst in. After regaining his freedom, he immediately called his friend who had cried for help, only to be informed that his friend had jumped from a building 2 days ago. Everything was coincidentally unbelievable. The detective in charge of the case even said that the victim's family not only firmly opposed an autopsy but also wanted to cremate the body that afternoon. When he requested to see the victim's phone, his colleague's captain suddenly barged in, even turning hostile and saying he wasn't in charge of the case and therefore had no right to examine the evidence. But since entering the force, Kyung had never been one to follow the rules. While everyone was distracted, he quickly grabbed the phone and ran into the restroom, locking the door behind him. No matter how much his colleagues shouted, it was useless. What surprised him was that before his death, the victim had called 4 or 5 people, all of whom were his former classmates from the police academy. However, before he could think it through, his colleague climbed over the wall and entered. After returning the phone, he calmly opened the restroom door as if nothing had happened. His sharp gaze made his colleague freeze, then he left the police station and rushed to the funeral home to stop the family from cremating his friend's body. But before his friend's wife could speak, the victim's cousin vehemently objected, asserting that he would never agree to an autopsy. Seeing this, Kyung hurriedly explained that the victim had jumped from the 9th floor of the construction site, but the elevator stopped on the 1st floor. This meant someone had left by elevator after the victim jumped. As soon as he finished speaking, 3 men suddenly barged in with arrogant attitudes. They were the classmates whom the victim had called before his death. One of them was even the prosecutor in charge of this case, which made Kyung even more suspicious. He cautiously asked the prosecutor why a deputy prosecutor like him would personally issue the conclusion that the victim had committed suicide. Receiving an answer with loopholes, Kyung immediately targeted his friend, who was now a judge, asking why they were so sure the victim had committed suicide. They claimed that the victim always had suicidal tendencies, so it was understandable. This answer made Kyung laugh because none of them mentioned the phone calls. Hearing that the victim had called all of them before his death, the first person to jump out and stop Kyung from speaking further was the victim's cousin, who even tried to get physical with Kyung, but ended up humiliating himself. Immediately after, the muscular friend attacked Kyung. But he had been fighting on the front lines against drugs for years, so his martial arts skills were not something they could match. Fortunately, the victim's wife intervened just in time. The utter heartbreak of knowing her husband had called everyone except her before his death temporarily calmed the situation down. After this incident, the victim's body was transferred to the morgue. Kyung took the key, effectively protecting the evidence for the time being. Now, as long as he could convince the victim's wife, the truth would be revealed. Even while eating, he didn't let his guard down, constantly observing the 3 classmates. Through reporter Yun Jin's account, he learned that when the victim's daughter was sick, it was his wealthy classmate who had provided the victim with 5 million won for medical expenses every month. That was why his wife didn't agree to an autopsy. In other words, the person who truly opposed the autopsy was the wealthy heir. However, before Kyung could gather more information, the victim's wife said she had to go home to get something and took Yun Jin with her. At the same time, a lawyer arrived and announced the victim's will, which Kyung's prosecutor colleague read. The victim's family understood the content of the will. No one cared about the division of property. But when they heard the victim had purchased a life insurance policy worth 50 billion won through his company a week before his death, everyone straightened their backs and prayed they would inherit the company. However, to everyone's surprise, according to the will, 100% of the company's shares were to be equally divided between Kyung and Yun Jin. Everyone looked at each other in astonishment because giving it to Yun Jin was understandable since the victim had secretly loved her before his death. But who was Kyung, and why could he receive 2.5 billion won while the victim's wife didn't receive a single penny? The next day, Yun Jin went to find Kyung to ask about the will. Unexpectedly, as she reached his door, she saw him collapse. Initially, Yun Jin thought Kyung had just fainted, but when she took him to his house, she found a package at the door. At first, she didn't think much of it, wanting to get Kyung inside first. But then she realized he was unconscious and saw that the package only had the deceased friend's name. Now, she felt something was strange. She hurriedly opened the package. Inside was just a pill and a letter. She had seen this pill before. Back then, downstairs from her apartment, a middle-aged woman died on the spot after taking this type of drug. After investigating, the police concluded it was a new type of drug. The letter stated this pill was for Kyung. She immediately guessed Kyung was going through withdrawal. However, as she put the letter away, Kyung suddenly woke up. His bloodshot eyes were filled with a craving identical to the addict's she had seen before. She rushed into the bathroom and locked herself inside. This is a drug. I can't live without it. Why are you like this? How can you use drugs? At this point, Yun Jin's heart was burning with anxiety. Yesterday, when she heard that she and Kyung would inherit 5 billion won, she was overjoyed. Not only because she was worried the wife of her deceased friend would fight for the assets, but also because if her friend was determined to have committed suicide, the 5 billion won insurance would be voided. Now, she and Kyung, an anti-drug cop, were in the same boat, so there was no need to worry about these things anymore. She even took the initiative to find Kyung, encouraging him to continue requesting an autopsy. But everything depended on whether the victim's wife would agree or not. However, as the two were about to persuade the victim's wife, they were stopped by the classmates who opposed the autopsy. They even revealed the inheritance issue. Your husband bought a life insurance policy worth 5 billion won before his death, but he wanted to give that 5 billion won to these two people. So that's why you advised me to get an autopsy, right? No, it's not like that. After all, no one could accept this truth. The couple had always loved each other, yet the assets weren't left to the wife. However, when everyone arrived at the police station, she gradually calmed down. Such an unusual situation must have a reason. Furthermore, to prevent the autopsy, her classmate, the prosecutor, not only argued with Kyung, but the chief himself even came to the interrogation room. He expressed his condolences to her while ordering Kyung to stop mentioning the autopsy. Perhaps this was the reason behind her husband's unusual actions. I want an autopsy. These words not only astonished everyone present but also caused her husband's wealthy classmate to suddenly appear. The only person who could have asked the chief to intervene was him. Under the tense watch of many people, her husband's body was autopsied. However, since the chief personally ordered the case not to be prosecuted, the autopsy results would take at least a month. During this time, Kyung had a more important task: to investigate a man named Chong Ho. Because besides him and Yun Jin, Chong Ho's name was also on the inheritance list. The prosecutor classmate had deliberately omitted this name when reading the will. It wasn't until Kyung investigated that he discovered Chong Ho had been missing for over 6 months. However, before he could reach Chong Ho's house, Yun Jin discovered his drug addiction. He didn't know how long it took for the outside to quiet down again. Yun Jin hastily flushed the drug down the toilet. At this point, Kyung had overcome his withdrawal. He told Yun Jin everything, from being captured to being forced to use drugs, hoping Yun Jin would help him conceal this until he found the person who had harmed him. And so, the two began to investigate together. But what surprised them was that inside Chong Ho's house, there was a tightly locked door, as if something dangerous was inside. Kyung, without saying a word, immediately broke down the door and rushed in. As the two entered the room, a foul stench assaulted their noses. The stench emanated from a body bag on the ground. It seemed the perpetrator was afraid they wouldn't know who was inside, so next to the body bag, they left a photo of Chong Ho and all their classmates together. Seeing a lot of blood in the body bag, Kyung immediately ran to the kitchen, donned disposable gloves, grabbed a fruit peeler, and ripped open the bag. Immediately, a horrifying scene appeared. However, the most noteworthy thing was that the state of decomposition of the body and the blood's fluidity didn't match. This indicated that Chong Ho had been frozen immediately after being killed and had only recently been brought here. The blood had only just started to flow due to thawing. This also explained why the door was so tightly locked. Thinking about this, Kyung hastily called his colleague, reporting the address while intending to examine the scene beforehand. Unexpectedly, before he could finish observing, someone suddenly threw a Molotov cocktail inside, setting the room ablaze. Kyung tried to extinguish the fire to preserve the scene, but human effort was limited, and he couldn't stop the flames from spreading. Even the body had been consumed by the fire. Left with no choice, the two could only run outside. But the toxic smoke triggered Kyung's withdrawal symptoms again. His body weakened, and his mind started to become hazy. Yun Jin, without thinking twice, was about to take him to the hospital when Kyung stopped her, asking her to take him to the police station instead. This puzzled Yun Jin greatly. Kyung had always concealed his addiction from his colleagues, So now asking to go to the police station was tantamount to confessing. But ultimately, she still took Kyung to the police station. Upon arriving at the police station, Kyung excused himself to buy medicine, sending the on-duty officer away. Then, struggling to suppress his weakness, he entered the office area. He remembered that among the drugs recently seized, his colleague had stored a pill in his drawer. It turned out he had come here to steal the drug. But as he dragged himself to the drawer, he laughed strangely. He laughed not only at his own helplessness but also at the unwavering will he had always prided himself on. When he got the drug, his consciousness completely vanished. When he woke up, Kyung found himself in the restroom. Through the scattered items on the floor, he realized it was the women's restroom. Based on the current time, he had lost at least 8 hours of memory. But now was not the time to reminisce. He cautiously opened the restroom door. Only after confirming no one was outside did he tiptoe to the public sink. After carefully observing, he was surprised to find that the bloodshot veins in his eyes had disappeared. He tried to recall what had happened before he lost his memory but could only vaguely remember the scene after he knocked over a pile of items and reached into his colleague's drawer. Inside was a drug. Realizing he had taken that drug, he was filled with regret. He had relied on his willpower to overcome 5 instances of withdrawal, yet he had failed last night. To investigate what had happened during his memory loss and who had brought him to the women's restroom, he immediately went to the police station's surveillance room. Utilizing his position as the leader of the anti-drug unit, he forced the surveillance staff to show him the footage. But to his surprise, last night's surveillance camera didn't capture him entering the office. It fast-forwarded directly to half an hour later. In other words, someone had deleted the footage of him entering the office. He checked the surveillance camera access log and discovered the last entry was from 3 days ago. This showed that the person who deleted the footage was deliberately concealing their identity. Fortunately, through a conversation with the surveillance staff, he learned that besides himself, only Chong-soo had accessed the surveillance footage today. Chong-soo was a member of his anti-drug unit. This discovery gave him goosebumps. After he was drugged by the mysterious person and left at the subway station, the person who picked him up was Chong-soo. After he went through withdrawal and caused a disturbance at the hospital, the person who handled the situation was also Chong-soo. Even last night, after discovering Chong-ho's body, he had only reported the address to Chong-soo, after which he was attacked with a Molotov cocktail. All these signs suggested that Chong-soo not only knew about his addiction but was also connected to the mysterious person behind it all. However, because he had stolen the drug evidence last night, his female colleague was currently turning the place upside down looking for it, as losing evidence was a serious offense. When she asked Chong-soo if he had seen it, his expression hesitated slightly. Then, he and the female colleague walked aggressively towards Kyung, reporting the missing drug. Kyung didn't know what Chong-soo was up to and could only sternly reprimand the two. Afterward, he stared into Chong-soo's eyes, asking if he had checked the surveillance footage. He noticed Chong-soo's eyes darting around, but he couldn't expose him yet. After all, everything was just his speculation. If Chong-soo didn't know about his addiction, blowing things out of proportion would backfire. Therefore, later, when the two were watching the surveillance footage together, his eyes were glued to Chong-soo. He even lost his composure when Chong-soo questioned him about his work arrangements. "I told you to investigate, so just do it." It had to be said that his acting skills were truly impressive. But the loss of control made him lose face, and he had to leave the police station, driving to the construction site where his deceased friend had fallen. Because before being drugged by the mysterious person, he had received a cry for help from his friend. So investigating the truth behind his friend's death was the only way to uncover the mysterious person. After scouring the construction site, he finally found a surveillance camera at the back gate. With the help of the restaurant owner, he even saw his friend's image in the surveillance footage. This image immediately reminded the restaurant owner that 2 months ago, this person had also come to check the surveillance camera. This indicated that his friend had deliberately gotten off the car here, clearly wanting to leave a clue for Kyung. However, the two were engrossed in watching the footage, completely unaware of a pair of eyes observing them from outside. As Kyung went to get his car, a man wearing a hooded jacket suddenly appeared. Not long after, the man, his hands covered in syrup, got into a taxi and left before Kyung returned. As expected, when Kyung saw the restaurant owner lying in a pool of bloody syrup, he also saw the burning hard drive. Fortunately, before taking his last breath, the restaurant owner managed to slip a USB drive into his hand. This was likely a backup of the surveillance footage copied before he was murdered. At the same time, a pair of male legs strode towards the deceased friend's house and rang the doorbell. Before opening the door, the friend's wife grumbled, "I told you not to come anymore." The visitor was a classmate of both Kyung and the deceased friend, prosecutor Tae Jin. Through their confrontation, two things could be discerned. First, they had been having an affair. Second, the woman possessed a code that was very important to Tae Jin. For this code, he was even willing to offer 10 billion won as a breakup fee. However, when the two arrived at the bank to withdraw the money, they were spotted by Yun Jin. She saw their cars entering the same building one after the other. As a journalist with a keen nose for news, Yun Jin immediately flashed a knowing smile. Not long after, Tae Jin's affair with his friend's wife was finally discovered by Kyung. Initially, Kyung went there only to find clues about his friend's death. Knowing his friend's wife was home alone, he didn't dare to look around. Even after realizing there were no clues, he hurriedly said goodbye before he had even finished his drink. Unexpectedly, as soon as he reached the door, he heard the sound of the lock being opened. It's important to know that after his friend passed away, only his wife lived alone in this house. So who knew the door code? Their eyes met, and a series of seemingly unrelated cases suddenly became clear. Yesterday, he had just found the surveillance camera footage from the day his friend died, and the restaurant owner was murdered. All the surveillance data was burned. Fortunately, with years of investigative experience, he quickly found the suspect's hiding place. Then, through inquiries with people in the surrounding area, he confirmed the suspect was a taxi driver. But when he reported his findings to the investigation team leader in charge of the case, the leader became angry. He not only warned Kyung, who was just an anti-drug cop, to stay out of ordinary homicide cases but also falsely accused Kyung's deceased friend of being a drug addict. Hearing this, Kyung's eyes instantly sharpened. Unfortunately, the investigation team leader's position was higher than his, so he could only endure it for the time being. Tae Jin was driving when he received a call from the investigation team leader. He not only revealed the progress of the restaurant owner's murder case but also mentioned the existence of surveillance camera footage, even telling Tae Jin that Kyung suspected the perpetrator was a taxi driver. Tae Jin immediately guessed the murderer's identity because among their former classmates, there was a junior who worked as a taxi driver. At the same time, the junior was calling the chubby guy to boast. He rambled on about how he had discovered Kyung finding the surveillance footage and how he had taken care of the scene. But in contrast to his smug expression, the chubby guy's face was extremely grim. When the two met, the chubby guy kept slapping the junior's face until he fell to the ground. Only then did he stop. The reason for the chubby guy's anger was that they had tried their best to prevent their friend's death from being ruled a homicide, even going so far as to reveal their identities to stop the autopsy. Now, the junior had caused such a commotion that even a fool would know there was something fishy about their friend's death. Fortunately, Tae Jin was a prosecutor. He ordered the investigation team leader to handle the case discreetly, which somewhat eased the conglomerate heir's anxiety. Their conversation revealed that the three of them had been planning for 20 years for the heir to inherit the chairman's position at the conglomerate. These days were the most crucial time, and no mistakes could occur. But fate had other plans. At this moment, Kyung was discussing the investigation's progress with reporter Yun Jin. Based on the information from the deceased friend's company, he had found the registered address, a house in a remote mountainous area. When the two of them entered, a young boy suddenly emerged from the house. Faced with Kyung's questions, the boy seemed clueless. It wasn't until Kyung told him about his friend's death that the boy revealed he knew who they were. He then led them to a green door, opening a room that hadn't been touched in a long time. Inside, there was only a simple desk. Kyung checked all the drawers but found nothing. When asked why he knew their names, the boy said that 10 days ago, his friend had instructed him that if any man came looking for him, it would be Detective Kyung, and if any woman came looking for him, it would be reporter Yun Jin. The boy didn't expect both of them to appear at the same time. As they left the boy's house, the image of the three of them walking down the mountain happened to catch the eye of a woman selling fruit. She showed a strange expression as if she had just discovered something. That was why Kyung went to his friend's house and discovered the ambiguous relationship between his friend's wife and Tae Jin. Although the friend's wife claimed that on the day her husband died, she had told Tae Jin the door code and asked him to go home and get something for her, Kyung wasn't a fool. However, to uncover the truth behind his friend's death, he had to pretend to trust Tae Jin and then ask Yun Jin to follow the two of them. Sure enough, the friend's wife snuck out at night. Without a doubt, the person she wanted to meet was Tae Jin. As a professional reporter, the young woman calmly walked to the nearest dining table. Before the other two could change their seats, she quickly put on her earphones, pretending to be immersed in music. Finally, she placed a voice recorder behind her, capturing their entire conversation. "Why did you suddenly come to my house? You know Kyung was there. You should have warned me." Through their conversation, Jin gleaned at least two crucial pieces of information. First, their relationship had been going on for 5 years. Second, the friend's wife possessed a code that was the key to obtaining a vast sum of money. For Jin to acquire this code, he had to divorce his wife and run away with her. At the same time, Kyung attended the restaurant owner's funeral. Thinking about how he was silenced just because Kyung was investigating the surveillance footage, he felt extremely guilty. He also realized he couldn't investigate this case alone. So when the female captain asked about the progress of the case, he decided to reveal all the secrets. First was the clue about the drug bust at the subway station, which was provided by his deceased friend. Then there was Chong Ho, the man who lived in the mountain house. He was not only a former classmate of his friend but also a former high-ranking figure in the Kim Hyong conglomerate. Finally, there was the vice president of the Kim Hyong conglomerate, the prosecutor Tae Jin, who was in charge of examining the deceased. Reporter Jin mentioned in the will, and himself, anti-drug cop Kyung. All four of them were former classmates of the victim. After understanding the complexity of the case, the captain not only agreed to secretly help him investigate but also helped him request an extension for submitting his gun, using the excuse that he had lost it while pursuing drug criminals. At the same time, the vice president of the Kim Hyong conglomerate, who was also the heir, was reporting to the chairman, his father, about the new city development project. This entire project was orchestrated by Tae Jin, so the report not only received the chairman's approval but also prompted him to personally inspect it. However, just as the heir was feeling smug, the chairman suddenly said, "So it was Tae Jin." It seemed the chairman was very familiar with Tae Jin. Even when they were students, the chairman had personally met Tae Jin. Back then, he had even asked the principal to gather all those who could help the heir into the same class, effectively building a team of confidants for his son. However, when the chairman mentioned knowing that the project was orchestrated by Tae Jin, the heir started to worry inexplicably. He even had trouble breathing, sweat pouring off him like he was taking a shower, and finally collapsed on stage. But those around him didn't seem surprised. The chubby guy immediately took him into a meeting room, and a staff member quickly brought a yellow pill that looked very similar to a drug. Under the captain's guidance, Kyung found the person who sold this drug. But unfortunately, the evidence had been taken by his colleague beforehand, who even showed a smug expression. At this time, the chubby guy ordered his subordinate to take Jin away. Although helpless as the head of security, he had to check everything thoroughly. Not only did he tear up all the documents related to the company, but even the girl's laptop wasn't spared. As per his superior's order, he also had to take the girl to the company's headquarters. But what surprised him was that the girl had a colleague waiting downstairs. The colleague immediately called their mutual friend. Not long after, the man rushed into the Kim Hyong conglomerate building. Unfortunately, the security guards were too numerous and immediately surrounded him. Just as he was about to break through, Jin emerged with an indifferent expression. Faced with the man's concern, she didn't say a word until she got into the car. Only then did she utter her first sentence. "Want to go eat barbecue?" Left with no choice, the friend could only temporarily suppress his curiosity. While eating, he called Kyung. Jin was taken away today. Kyung received the news and hurried to the restaurant. However, he didn't ask Jin what had happened after she was taken away. Instead, he took the initiative to pour her some wine. When he saw her pouring white wine into a large glass, he even secretly replaced it with a full glass of beer, quickly getting Jin drunk. In her drunken state, she recounted the whole story. It turned out that after taking her to the company, the chubby guy didn't make things difficult for her. Instead, he gave her 2 envelopes. "What's this? I knew we'd meet sooner or later, so I prepared an envelope beforehand. But today, after confirming your intentions, I felt one wasn't enough, so I gave you 2. Jin scoffed, thinking he was insulting her professional ethics. The chubby guy didn't say much, just urging her to open them quickly. When the first envelope was opened, Jin immediately understood his intentions. "Perhaps you have some misunderstanding about me. Looking at these photos, it seems that bribery and threats are necessary." The envelope was filled with pictures of her taking advantage of her position to get free meals. Although she had turned over a new leaf now, she was still being blackmailed by the chubby guy. Now, she could only sigh to Kyung. The revelation of her friend's wife and Tae Jin's affair also came out, leaving the friend beside them speechless. But Kyung wasn't surprised because he had personally witnessed Tae Jin using the code to open his deceased friend's door. Although at the time, the friend's wife had explained that Tae Jin had helped her get something, so he knew the code, but looking at their panicked expressions, Kyung had guessed the truth. The next morning, upon arriving at the company, the chubby guy saw Yun Jin waiting for him. She tossed him an envelope containing the cash he had used to bribe her yesterday. There are a few bills missing inside because I just bought these new sneakers. I also upgraded my laptop, which you broke, to the latest model. As for those photos, you can send them wherever you want because people are tired of these kinds of news. Through the restaurant owner's footage, Kyung quickly found the information on the car that appeared in the video. After coordinating with the apartment building security, he broke into the owner's house. However, to his surprise, the woman living in the apartment had absolutely nothing to do with the case. The only suspicious thing was that she had suddenly braked hard at the scene of the murder. According to the woman's statement, the reason she had braked hard was to avoid a man running onto the road. Through the dashcam footage from her car, Kyung finally found a clue to the suspect, the head of research and development at a pharmaceutical company. When the head of research was leaving work, he bumped into Kyung. But he wasn't surprised, on the contrary, he seemed at ease. Through his story, Kyung finally learned the truth about his friend's death. It turned out that night, his friend had called his 3 former classmates right in front of the head of research, inviting them to meet at the construction site at 11 a.m. the next day, saying he had something important to tell them. The first to arrive was prosecutor Tae Jin, followed by the vice president of the pharmaceutical company and the chubby guy, his head of security. However, before they could even greet each other, the lights on the rooftop suddenly turned on. They intended to take the elevator up there, but when the elevator reached halfway, a figure suddenly fell. When they went back, everyone was horrified to realize the person who fell was their friend. I want to ask you if you saw it with your own eyes or just felt he deserved to die. That day, Tae Jin went to our friend, checked his pulse, and said we had to leave quickly. If the police found out we were at the scene, things would be very troublesome. So Tae Jin said that? As if without him, you couldn't have done anything. Kyung didn't believe the head of research's words at all. His reasoning was chilling. Among those in the elevator at the time, one person couldn't personally take someone's life. One person could make anything happen with just an order, and one person could cover up anything. But what if someone pushed our friend? Even if those 3 did something, you would just stand by and watch? Clearly, those 3 all had crucial roles, only the head of research was useless. Therefore, he was the prime suspect. However, when Kyung inquired whether he thought their friend had committed suicide, his answer completely dismissed Kyung's suspicions. No. Why not? Because I saw it. At that time, no one else paid attention to this. The victim was wearing shoes. This detail sent chills down Kyung's spine because when the police arrived at the scene, their friend's shoes were found on the 9th floor. In other words, after they left, someone had secretly gone up to the rooftop and placed the shoes there. At this moment, Kyung's subordinate arrived at an antique shop and overheard laughter behind a wall. He immediately drew his gun, cautiously observing the surroundings. He then discovered a secret tunnel leading to a drug den. It's important to know that these were all desperate individuals. Even with a gun pointed at their heads, they would fight back fiercely. The young man even went inside to check the amount of drugs. The woman there saw this and smiled. It turned out he was an undercover cop. Yesterday, despite swiftly grabbing the syringe containing drugs, he had been cornered by Kyung. However, faced with Kyung's suspicions, Kim calmly replied that he had only accidentally learned about Kyung's addiction. That day, upon returning to the police station, he happened to see Kyung lying unconscious on the floor, holding an empty drug packet, but the powder inside was gone. So after taking Kyung to the restroom, he deleted the surveillance footage. Why didn't you report it to your superiors? I thought there must be a reason, so I didn't tell the captain. Looking at his subordinate's sincere eyes, Kyung seemed to believe him. He not only recounted the story of how he was forced to use drugs but also asked him to help investigate the person behind it all. That's why the subordinate went to the woman's den and directly asked why they had harmed Kyung. The woman put on an innocent expression, saying this was the first time she had heard of such a thing. Moreover, her drugs were all supplied by a man with a scar on his face. Therefore, the prime suspect was this man. Clearly, in this cooperative relationship, Kyung's subordinate was being manipulated. Although he wanted to ask the woman to help investigate the whereabouts of the scarred man, she coldly called out his full name. Then she took a wad of cash from the drawer and stuffed it into his hand, saying this was payment for their mutual assistance, but only limited to that. She didn't want to get involved in finding anyone. After Kyung's subordinate left, the woman showed a puzzled expression, muttering that she forgot to ask who was behind this and why they wanted Kyung to be addicted to drugs. In other words, the person who harmed Kyung was this woman and her accomplices. At the same time, Kyung was asking the delivery man about the delivery mix-up years ago. It turned out that years ago, the delivery man had mistakenly delivered the package sent by his deceased friend. The shipment that day consisted of 9 identical-looking boxes. One box was to be delivered to a hotel, and the rest were to be delivered to a hospital. Before leaving, Kyung's friend repeatedly emphasized to the delivery man that the single box must be delivered to the hotel first, that he shouldn't stop anywhere else along the way, and that he had to deliver it as quickly as possible. He even paid 10 times the regular delivery fee. But that day, it was raining heavily, and in his haste to race against time, the delivery man ran a yellow light. While trying to avoid a car, he fell, and the packages on his motorcycle scattered everywhere. Ignoring the pain, the delivery man hurriedly got up and picked up the fallen boxes. At this point, he was shocked to realize one box was missing. Without thinking twice, the delivery man quickly lifted his motorcycle, grabbed the single box from the trunk, and decided to deliver the entire batch to the hospital first, then buy another box to deliver to the hotel. Just then, the driver of the other car returned with the box that had fallen earlier. Thinking it was all the same type of medicine, the delivery man casually tossed the box into the trunk and rushed to the hospital. Unfortunately, neither the chubby guy receiving the package at the hotel nor the pharmacist at the hospital noticed the medicine had been swapped until a patient died from taking the wrong medication. That was when Kyung's friend approached the delivery man. Fortunately, the delivery man's grandmother intervened just in time, calming him down. But the events that followed were even stranger. First, the hospital, using the excuse that the morgue was overcrowded, cremated the patient's body that very day. Then, the remaining medication was taken by a man, who was none other than Kyung's friend. Next were 3 people who met with accidents one after another. The first was Chong Ho, the head of research at the pharmaceutical company. After 6 months of missing, his body was suddenly found at his home. The second was Kyung's friend. After calling his 3 former classmates, he also died suddenly from jumping off a building. The last was the restaurant owner near the scene of the incident. He was murdered right before the police's eyes. After learning that the delivery destination was a cold storage facility, the 2 immediately went there. But before they could figure out how to get inside, Kyung suddenly spotted a balloon in the distance. He had seen this balloon somewhere else. In an instant, all his suspicions were confirmed. He hurriedly ran along the road south, crossed an intersection, and the murdered restaurant owner's shop appeared before his eyes. It turned out this was the reason his friend had jumped from the building here, and it was also the reason the perpetrator could bypass all the surveillance cameras. Because opposite the cold storage facility, there was a pedestrian path wide enough for a car to pass through. The fresh tire tracks on the ground proved this. What excited Kyung even more was that the surveillance camera at the end of the path was still operational. Through this camera, he finally found traces of the perpetrator, a private taxi. The captain immediately ordered an investigation into the owner of the car. After uncovering the secret of the vast sum of money through the conversation between Tae Jin and her friend's wife, Yun Jin assigned an intern to follow them 24/7 and report everything to her. However, one day, the friend's wife didn't go to the hotel as usual but entered a 3-story apartment building instead. After learning the specific address, Yun Jin was surprised because it was her apartment, also Kyung's apartment. But after hearing the friend's wife's true intentions, her fear instantly turned to anger. I thought that 5 billion won would be mine. Clearly, the friend's wife still didn't know about the secret sum of 5 trillion won. Otherwise, she wouldn't care about this small amount, even going so far as to turn hostile right in front of everyone. I'm his only relative, yet he left it to those irrelevant people who haven't been in contact, and even those 2 people said it was strange. Yun Jin wasn't one to be bullied either. Her angry gaze made the friend's wife wary. I can tolerate other things, but I can't tolerate you using your words to call me disgusting. Fortunately, she hadn't lost control yet, maintaining some dignity for the friend's wife. At this moment, her friend suddenly appeared with a cake in hand. Today was Yun Jin's birthday, but unexpectedly, it was ruined by the friend's wife. Seeing Yun Jin about to leave, he could only bring out the cake earlier. Kyung reluctantly joined this birthday party. Everyone was in an awkward situation, so no one noticed the friend's wife's increasingly strange expression. As Yun Jin blew out the candles, the friend's wife asked her if it was her birthday today. Yes. She noticed the look in the friend's wife's eyes, clearly the look of someone scheming something. Fortunately, she started feeling nauseous, preventing the situation from worsening. Through her expression and last few words, Yun Jin guessed the reason. She took the friend's wife's phone and entered her birthday. Sure enough, it unlocked the phone. Her realization was caught by the friend standing next to her. Combined with the conversation between Yun Jin and the intern he had overheard earlier while getting the cake, he immediately guessed the truth. Then you don't understand Tae Jin yet. He will do anything to make the friend's wife reveal the code. The next day, when Yun Jin took the initiative to meet him, intending to lie and ask for his help, she was immediately exposed. The password is your birthday, right? 0305. Yesterday, the friend's wife realized her husband had always used his ex-girlfriend's birthday as his password, which is why she ran to the bathroom to vomit. How did you know that? This money definitely has something to do with the deceased friend and Tae Jin, right? But the friend is gone. Tae Jin wants to withdraw that money. He thought only the friend's wife knew the code, but it's actually your birthday. Only you and the friend's wife know this. Can't I keep this money for myself? Of course not. It's not your money. However, the temptation of 5 trillion won was too great. Ultimately, Yun Jin chose to take the risk. She not only told Tae Jin that she knew the secret but also arranged to meet him at an internet cafe. She even booked the entire cafe for this meeting. However, to become the Inspector General, Tae Jin wasn't an ordinary man. With just a few words, he explained the origin of the money and stated that even though she had the code, she couldn't spend it. But Yun Jin wasn't unprepared either. She directly opened the computer, and on it were intimate photos of Tae Jin and her friend's wife. The recipient wasn't just a major media outlet but also the conglomerate heir whom Tae Jin feared the most. It's important to know that once the heir learned about the existence of the 5 trillion won, he would surely use any means to seize it. By then, Tae Jin would also be left empty-handed. So after entering his 4-digit code, he reluctantly handed the keyboard to Yun Jin. However, what surprised everyone was that after Yun Jin entered the code and Tae Jin pressed enter, the password was incorrect. No wonder Tae Jin was so angry. He had tried 8 times before, and this made it 9 failed attempts. Once all 10 chances were used, the 5 trillion won would be permanently locked. However, just as Yun Jin was about to lose her life, a man suddenly barged in. Without saying a word, he threw Tae Jin outside. The newcomer was Yun Jin's friend. In his haste to save her, he forgot to turn off the computer, leaving countless uncertainties for the future. Finally, the case reached its moment of revelation. The breakthrough was this unexpected murder. Initially, the chubby guy only intended to scare the man but was hindered by his assistant. Taking advantage of the chubby guy's momentary shock, the assistant struck repeatedly. By the time the chubby guy reacted, it was too late. Left with no choice, the two had to hide the victim in an abandoned warehouse, carefully concealing him behind shelves. However, what the chubby guy didn't expect was that 6 months later, the deceased friend suddenly contacted him, setting a meeting at 11 a.m. and threatening to reveal that someone had died in the cold storage facility if he didn't show up. What surprised him even more was that his friend suddenly died from jumping off a building, and then Chong Ho's body was also discovered. However, the location where the body was found wasn't the cold storage facility but the victim's own home. His assistant received a text message from a mysterious person and used a Molotov cocktail to burn the body. Now, through the restaurant owner's case, Kyung had deduced that the perpetrator was the assistant. But they could only watch from afar and couldn't arrest him at his home. Helplessly, they had to split into 2 groups. Kyung stayed behind to comfort the victim's family, while the rest went to pursue the car. When Kyung entered the house, he noticed the toy car in the yard was identical to the car with the covered license plate in the surveillance footage. Even the tape residue on the license plate was the same. He also found a straw in the trunk that reeked of gasoline. The perpetrator likely used this straw to siphon gasoline and make the Molotov cocktail. Kyung's actions quickly alerted the woman to something unusual. While he wasn't looking, she quickly grabbed her daughter's phone, ran into the bedroom, and made a call. "Run. The police are on their way to arrest you. You must not get caught, do you understand?" Ultimately, everyone returned empty-handed. Kyung was also suspended from duty for a week by the captain for failing his mission. But what surprised everyone was that night, as Kyung was preparing to celebrate Yun Jin's birthday, the intern following the friend's wife accidentally captured the assistant near Kyung's house. Without thinking twice, Kyung rushed to the phone booth, but he was 1 step too late. The phone booth was already empty. Fortunately, through investigating the call logs, the police quickly identified the person the assistant had contacted, Tae Jin. Not long after, Kyung was allowed back to the police station. But before he could even warm his seat, the chubby guy suddenly appeared. It turned out that the drug lord whom Kyung had arrested before still refused to confess. Helplessly, they had to resort to outside help. But this kid was clearly blind despite having eyes. It wasn't until the chubby guy wrapped a straw around the kid's finger that he suddenly came to his senses. Everyone recounted that 11 years ago, a chubby guy had used a straw to wipe out an entire gang, earning him the nickname, Straw. So when he heard he had to be alone with this Grim Reaper, The kid hastily confessed not only that his boss was the scarred man but also revealed his hiding place, fearing that if he was a second too late, he would lose his life. However, just as the two were about to arrest the scarred man, Kyung suddenly received a message from the hearing aid shop owner. "He's here. Come quickly." It turned out that when Kyung was forced to take harmful drugs and abandoned at the subway station, one of them accidentally dropped their hearing aid. After days of investigating, Kyung finally found the hearing aid shop owner. The owner agreed that whenever that person returned, he would try to stall for time. For Kyung, capturing the person who had harmed him was more important than catching the scarred man. So he sent his subordinate to the scarred man's location first while he went to the hearing aid shop. Then, he secretly followed the man, finally arriving at a wholesale market. However, what surprised Kyung was that there were too many pathways in the market. In the blink of an eye, he lost sight of the man. As he was searching everywhere, he suddenly spotted a familiar figure, his subordinate. He should have been at the scarred man's location by now. It turned out the subordinate had been staying in contact with the female drug trafficker. Today, he received a call from her, saying she wanted to give him a gift, and this was her hideout. However, before the subordinate could figure out the reason, gunshots suddenly rang out in the distance. The two quickly ran towards the sound and finally arrived at the entrance of an antique shop. The scene inside shocked them both. First, the man at the door was already dead. Next, there was a woman who had been shot in the stomach, lying on the ground, barely breathing. Finally, the only survivor was the man wearing the hearing aid. Kyung tried to stop the woman's bleeding, but when he saw the scene behind her, he was stunned. It looked exactly like the room where he had been forced to take drugs. "You were the one who injected me with drugs, weren't you? Why did you do that?" It was clear she was the one who had forced Kyung to take drugs. But no matter how hard she tried, she couldn't make a sound, eventually dying with resentment. Kyung still didn't want to give up. He tried performing CPR but couldn't save her. This left him deeply despairing because the only clue about the person who had drugged him was cut off. He hoped the surviving man wearing the hearing aid could provide some insider information. But his subordinate's thoughts were completely opposite to Kyung's. He quickly separated from the colleague responsible for checking the surveillance footage and searched for the date and time he had been here before. After confirming there was a record of his visit, he immediately deleted it. Finally, he approached the colleague responsible for escorting the man wearing the hearing aid, using the excuse that he could handle the escort himself to separate from the female colleague. As soon as they got into the car, he eagerly asked why they had been suddenly exposed. It turned out the woman had always been getting her supply from the scarred man. This time, she wanted to eliminate the scarred man's underlings and contact the source directly, but she failed miserably because the scarred man had a gun. The gun in the scarred man's hand was Kyung's gun. So the captain was currently in a difficult situation because police guns used special 0.38mm bullets. Once the woman was autopsied, the fact that he had lost his gun would be impossible to hide. At the same time, the subordinate threatened the man wearing the hearing aid to keep quiet, and he would help him get a reduced sentence from the judge. But the man wearing the hearing aid didn't understand the situation at all and even tried to threaten the subordinate back. "Stop the car at the warehouse ahead. Otherwise, I have nothing left to lose." The man wearing the hearing aid didn't know that before the escort, the subordinate had already come up with a plan to deal with him. He opened the car windows and waited until the car reached a section of road by the lake, then suddenly swerved right. When the captain and Kyung arrived, the car had already been pulled ashore. The subordinate, pretending to be barely conscious, explained that the criminal had suddenly resisted with his feet, so he instinctively raised his hand to block, resulting in him losing control of the steering wheel and causing the accident. However, as soon as the subordinate was taken into the ambulance, Kyung noticed two suspicious points at the scene. First was the direction the car had plunged into the water. Because the criminal was sitting behind the passenger seat, the hand the subordinate raised to block should have been his right hand, while his body was leaning to the left. How could he have swerved right? Second was the open car window. Since the car windows were electrically controlled, once the car had submerged, the windows wouldn't be able to open. This meant the window had been opened beforehand. At this moment, the junior who had killed Chong Ho and the restaurant owner was being pursued by the police. However, the first person he called for help wasn't the chubby guy, nor the conglomerate heir, but the cunning Tae Jin. "Why are you calling me?" Clearly, Tae Jin didn't want to get involved in this mess. Hearing this, the taxi driver used Tae Jin's affair with his deceased friend's wife to coerce him, forcing Tae Jin to help him obtain drugs. He didn't know that the moment he uttered the threat, Tae Jin's expression turned murderous. But as the conglomerate heir's advisor, he would absolutely not do it himself. So he called the conglomerate heir, using the excuse that the taxi driver knew too many secrets to lure him into pulling the weeds by the roots. Hearing this, the chubby guy immediately objected because, after all, he was the one who had directly carried out the deeds. He didn't want to be the scapegoat if things were exposed later. The conglomerate heir also didn't want to be manipulated. I'll think about it. You always force me to make decisions every time you present me with choices, don't you? This situation caught Tae Jin off guard. But what surprised him even more was that their entire conversation was recorded by a mysterious person. The recording was quickly forwarded to the taxi driver. Hearing them discuss taking his life, the taxi driver's hatred for Tae Jin deepened. At this moment, the mysterious person sent another message, claiming that the deceased friend's wife and Tae Jin had killed her husband together, and the evidence was in her possession. At the same time, the police tracked the taxi driver's phone signal and discovered he was speeding towards an apartment building. Upon hearing the name of the apartment complex, Kyung immediately guessed his intentions. At this moment, the taxi driver was ringing the doorbell of the deceased friend's house. Using the excuse of having his friend's last words, he successfully entered. Not long after, Kyung arrived and noticed the doorknob was covered in syrup. He desperately pounded on the door, but there was no response. At this point, he remembered that Tae Jin had opened the lock before, so he called Tae Jin and asked for the door code, saying that his friend's wife's life was in danger. Clearly, they were too late. The friend's wife was lying in a pool of syrup. Fortunately, after checking, Kyung discovered she was still breathing faintly. After instructing his colleagues to call an ambulance, he immediately followed the blood trail, chasing after the perpetrator. However, as soon as he ran out of the apartment building, his drug cravings resurfaced. His entire body went weak, and he collapsed to the ground. His eyes turned bloodshot, and his body felt like it was being gnawed by thousands of ants. He hurriedly dug into his wallet and retrieved the last pill. But just as he was about to put it in his mouth, the remaining sliver of reason brought him back. Although he managed to control himself, Kyung no longer had the strength to chase after the taxi driver. He desperately crawled towards a nearby car, struggling with all his might to suppress his cravings. At the same time, Tae Jin called the chubby guy and the conglomerate heir to the secret base. A few minutes ago, the taxi driver tried to kill the friend's wife but failed, so he ran away. These words made the two feel helpless. No one could have imagined that the taxi driver who had been by their side all this time was a cold-blooded killer. Just then, he called the heir for help and criticized the others, unaware that the heir had secretly turned on the recording function. That Tae Jin is so vicious, and he's in cahoots with the chubby guy. It had to be said that the taxi driver was very good at digging his own grave. Initially, the chubby guy felt a bit reluctant, but now he also harbored murderous intent. After the heir told him to lay low for a while, the taxi driver's path to his own demise was set. According to the taxi driver, if he were caught by the police, he would reveal how the heir had ordered him to kill Chong Ho. Not only that, he even planned to use their rules from their school days to threaten the conglomerate heir. Have you forgotten the third rule from our school days? Always help your friends. Where are you? Let's meet and talk. Clearly, the heir also had intentions to silence him. Tae Jin showed a sinister smile, while the chubby guy's expression was one of helplessness. Only the taxi driver failed to hear the underlying meaning in those words, still lost in gratitude. The car sped towards a dense forest. Seeing this, the taxi driver hurriedly ran towards it. However, as soon as he got into the car, he was drugged by the chubby guy. Sure enough, the one who ultimately carried out the deed was still the chubby guy. No matter how hard the taxi driver struggled, he couldn't escape the fate of being buried alive. However, before doing so, the chubby guy still wanted him to die with clarity. Unexpectedly, the taxi driver remained stubborn. He even thought that he had always tried his best to please the conglomerate heir, yet he had to meet such a tragic end. They were all bastards. The chubby guy didn't want to argue and directly flipped him over, face down. But just as the shovel was about to strike, the taxi driver started playing the emotional card. He said that back in their school days, the chubby guy was his role model. He did all this only because he wanted to be like the chubby guy, standing proudly beside the heir. These words truly moved the chubby guy. Ultimately, he spared the taxi driver's life and warned him that the taxi driver of the past was dead. There would be no one like that anymore. Our friendship ends here. However, if he had understood these words, he wouldn't have gone down this path of no return. So he continued on his self-destructive journey. After taking a few steps, the chubby guy heard the taxi driver still muttering about their rules from their school days. He immediately turned back and struck him with the shovel. At this moment, the identity of the mastermind behind all the crimes was revealed. It was the seemingly timid head of research, the one who was always being ordered around. He was the one who had instructed others to put the powder in Kyung's food, then revealed the location of the drug deal to Kyung, intending for him to arrest the scarred man and thereby trace the drug trafficking ring to capture Tae Jin's entire gang. However, back then, Kyung failed to capture the scarred man and even had his gun stolen. He then placed Chon Ho's body at his home, luring the killer to the scene to dispose of the body, hoping Kyung would follow these clues to find the perpetrator, the taxi driver, and expose the wealthy heir Tae Jin's crimes. But Kyung didn't act as he had predicted. Ultimately, he had to take matters into his own hands, eavesdropping on Tae Jin's plan to eliminate the taxi driver, luring the taxi driver to the deceased friend's wife's place to search for evidence. Even the person who sent the message to Kyung about the scarred man's escape time was him. To continue framing Tae Jin, he impersonated Tae Jin and called the scarred man, even deliberately mentioning their meeting a year ago when the scarred man was just a lottery ticket seller, without a drug trafficking ring. Ironically, this very call helped the police quickly locate him. When Kyung and Yun Jin arrived at the gate, they bumped into him. Kyung sensed something was wrong and followed their car to a clubhouse. Thanks to the listening device Yun Jin was carrying, they overheard the conversation between him and Tae Jin. "You think I killed our friend too? Our friend said that once he earned 500 million, he would stop selling drugs. You were the one who forced him to continue." This dialogue revealed many crucial pieces of information. Their friend and Tae Jin were involved in a major investment operation. Many believed Tae Jin was the one who killed their friend. Using these 2 points, Kyung quickly made the head of research confess everything. Surprisingly, when he couldn't deny it any longer, the head of research led them to the drug manufacturing facility. However, as soon as the 3 of them left, a car mysteriously followed them. Unaware of being tailed, they arrived at the warehouse where the victim's body had been hidden before. After opening the door to one of the warehouses, the head of research walked towards a shelf, behind which was a secret door. After entering the password, the curtain concealing the drug trafficking ring was fully lifted. What shocked Kyung and Yun Jin was that they hadn't expected such a vast space below. Although it wasn't operational currently, they could imagine how many families would be ruined if the factory were running at full capacity. Here, the head of research confessed to Kyung that he was the one who got him involved in the drug trade. Seeing his despicable demeanor, perhaps no one could hold back their anger. However, Kyung knew there were still many secrets to be uncovered, so he tried to stay calm and listen to him tell everything. His goal was only to put Tae Jin behind bars to avenge his deceased friend. "Why are you so sure that Tae Jin killed our friend? Can't you see? All the clues point to Tae Jin. He was the one who stopped everyone from going up to the 9th floor. He was the one who confirmed the victim was dead. He was the one who prevented the autopsy, and now he's the one obstructing the case." The head of research also bluntly stated that Tae Jin was very meticulous in his work. There was currently no evidence that could incriminate him. For example, in the drug trafficking operation, they could only trace it back to him and their deceased friend. As for Chon Ho's case, they could only trace it back to the chubby guy and the wealthy heir. All the crimes seemed to have nothing to do with Tae Jin. That was what was most terrifying about him. The head of research admitted that putting Tae Jin behind bars through legitimate means was impossible. Only a scheming person like him could make him reveal his true colors. So he pleaded with Kyung to not arrest him yet, to give him 1 more week. He would definitely find Tae Jin's weaknesses, and then he would voluntarily surrender. However, plans never kept pace with change. The photo of the 3 of them going to the warehouse earlier had appeared on the chubby guy's phone. He had always been having people follow Tae Jin, unexpectedly uncovering their plan. On the other side, the chairman of the conglomerate discovered that Tae Jin, whom he had painstakingly groomed to become the prosecutor general and intended to be his son's trusted advisor, was secretly running a drug trafficking operation. Immediately, he warned Tae Jin, "Don't get on my bad side unless you want to lose everything." Unlike his father's deep thinking, the heir to the conglomerate was more impulsive and hot-headed. Upon learning about Tae Jin's drug dealings, he lured him to the secret base, gave him a severe beating, and interrogated him about the 5 billion won from the drug operation. This money could solve the difficulties in the new city project the conglomerate had just acquired. But that was all the money Tae Jin had. Knowing he couldn't keep it, he had to reveal the password to a safe, which only the heir's younger brother knew. He even mocked provocatively, "No one can get that money. Your brother will never wake up." The heir didn't believe him and went to ask the barely conscious head of research, but the answer remained the same. This close yet unreachable treasure drove the heir even more insane. To vent his anger, he ordered the chubby guy to get drugs to turn Tae Jin into an addict. However, as soon as the chubby guy left, Tae Jin suddenly looked to the side. The next moment, the head of research knocked the heir unconscious. He defied everything, even confronting the conglomerate heir, to save Tae Jin. Tae Jin didn't know that this was actually the way the other party was pushing him towards his doom. On the way, the head of research cautiously asked Tae Jin what his next move was. As expected, Tae Jin replied that he would eliminate them all. He wanted to frame the conglomerate for the drug trafficking. The only way was to silence the head of research, the only one who knew and participated in the production. Fortunately, Tae Jin still had a sliver of conscience. After smashing the head of research's phone, he gave him 12 hours to escape. After that, he would issue a warrant for his arrest. If caught, the head of research would only have one path: death. This isn't a threat but your last chance. The next morning, Tae Jin led people to the chairman's family's cold storage facility for inspection. He acted without any pretense, directly leading them to the warehouse containing the entrance to the drug manufacturing facility. Even casually mentioning the lock's password was 3808. Tae Jin's hasty actions were intended to catch the chairman off guard. As expected, his first reaction was to contain the information at all costs, unaware that Tae Jin's next move was to report the investigation results to the mayor of Seoul. Therefore, just an hour later, Tae Jin sat facing the chairman. Next to him was the heir, who had just regained consciousness after being knocked out. Let your son be the scapegoat. Just say it was his individual act, and the company won't be affected. After all, the heir was the chairman's only son. How could he let his son take the blame? But for Tae Jin to confront him so directly, he must have a trump card, and that trump card was this call. The chairman had put all his effort into the new city project. If the mayor revoked the permit, even a top conglomerate would crumble. Left with no choice, the chairman had to accept sending his son to prison for a while. However, the mayor wasn't Tae Jin's puppet. He declared that even if everything was the heir's doing, he wouldn't award the project to Kim Jong conglomerate. But Tae Jin seemed to intentionally ignore this, directly sending the mayor 2 photos and saying those were just 2 of the 38 most polite photos. Now there's no problem with awarding the project to Kim Jong conglomerate, right, mayor? Consider this call never happened. And so, the tycoon who once commanded wind and rain was dealt a fatal blow by the very dog he had raised. At this moment, Kyung was busy pursuing the scarred criminal. But just as he ordered his subordinate to approach the target, he received a call from a colleague. The dashcam footage from the car that plunged into the water had been recovered. The video clearly showed his subordinate opening the car windows before driving the car into the water, while the criminal hadn't attacked him at all. The criminal drowned to death. Immediately, Kyung and the captain arrested the subordinate. However, the interrogation had to be postponed because according to information from the head of research, the scarred man would be escaping across the border that night. Kyung had encountered him before, so the undercover mission was assigned to the captain. Before leaving, the captain gave Kyung her gun as a precaution. This gun would play a crucial role because the operation didn't go smoothly. From the moment the scarred man appeared, unexpected situations arose one after another. The captain hadn't even had time to act when the smuggling group arrived in a truck. Then Kyung received a call from a colleague, informing him their cover had been blown. The smuggling group not only changed their location but also declared they wouldn't let the captain leave alive. By the time Kyung tried to warn her, it was too late. Fortunately, the captain was wearing a bulletproof vest, so the shot didn't cause serious injury. She even quickly subdued the man. However, the scarred man had escaped. Kyung wanted to shoot, but his drug cravings hit, making him unable to aim. He hurriedly drove after them, intercepting the truck at the dock, but only the smuggling group remained inside. The scarred man had vanished. Kyung hastily looked out to sea and saw a ship leaving the dock. Fortunately, there was a lighthouse at the mouth of the harbor. Kyung rushed out, finally reaching the ship before it left territorial waters. However, due to his withdrawal symptoms and strenuous activity, his hands were trembling uncontrollably. If he didn't land a fatal shot, the target would surely escape. At this moment, Kyung noticed the rope on the railing. He quickly untied it, wrapped one end around his wrist, and then kicked the railing hard to tighten the rope. This way, when he raised his hand, the rope would pull down, helping to stabilize his aim. The next moment, the bullet struck the scarred man, and the captain immediately raised his hands in surrender. At this moment, police sirens blared in the distance. However, what surprised everyone was that the person who stepped out of the car wasn't there to arrest the scarred man. Instead, they handcuffed Kyung. It turned out that during the interrogation of the drug trafficking group, A police officer overheard someone mentioning how Kyung was injected with drugs but recovered at an incredible speed. This statement made the officer suspicious. He went to search Kyung's locker and took a hair from his shirt, discovering that Kyung had used drugs. After forcing the chairman of the conglomerate to send his son to prison, Tae Jin took advantage of the opportunity while the conglomerate was expanding, using the chairman's son's parole as a bargaining chip, demanding 8% of the shares from the chairman. Not stopping there, he even went to the prison and used the truth that the chairman had abandoned his son for money to instigate and drive a wedge between their father-son relationship. Finally, he magnanimously recruited the chubby guy, the most loyal bodyguard of the conglomerate heir. Just as everything seemed to be going according to Tae Jin's plan, the head of research suddenly called, saying that he held evidence of his crimes and wanted to meet him one last time. At this time, Tae Jin was very arrogant, not taking the head of research seriously at all. So he agreed to meet immediately, even setting the meeting place at the secret base. On the other side, the news of Kyung's arrest for drug use, with the captain vouching for him, reached the chief. It turned out that when Kyung had a withdrawal episode at his friend's house, the captain had witnessed the whole thing, so she knew he was innocent. At this moment, the captain had already fabricated a reason for Kyung, claiming he was forcibly injected with drugs while pursuing a criminal. Although Kyung felt guilty inside, he didn't deny it. At this time, the subordinate who was arrested for attempted murder suddenly took all the blame, claiming that he was the one who had given Kyung drugs. He even showed everyone his phone with the missing surveillance footage of Kyung collapsing in the restroom. Clearly, Kyung fainted as soon as he picked up the drug packet. It was him who personally gave Kyung the drug. This action shattered Kyung's patience, which he had maintained for half a month. The subordinate even confessed that he was the one who had instructed others to give Kyung drugs for the first time. Fortunately, Kyung had already known this was done by the head of research and stopped the subordinate from taking the blame. However, the chief didn't care about the truth because, for him, the police force's image was the most important. He ordered Kyung to immediately go elsewhere for treatment, but Kyung requested 3 more days. "Within 3 days, I will resolve everything here." At this time, a female colleague handed him a sketch of the person who killed the taxi driver. It turned out that when the chubby guy was about to bury the taxi driver alive, an old man collecting leaves saw him. Thanks to that, they obtained this sketch. Kyung had just captured the chubby guy when he received a call from the head of research, asking him to come to Tae Jin's secret base. When the head of research arrived, Tae Jin still had some sense of reason. Upon meeting, he immediately asked for the head of research's phone and then put it in a thick safe to eliminate the possibility of recording. "Give me the evidence. I don't have any. If I did, I would have given it to Kyung long ago." Realizing he was tricked, Tae Jin immediately shed his facade of pretense, choosing the most brutal solution. It's important to know that he had always considered himself an educated man, never resorting to violence before. But now, he had become so arrogant that he no longer cared about maintaining his image. Just then, Kyung suddenly appeared, witnessing his entire ugly side. Leaving aside how Kyung regained his freedom, but when he saw Kyung's true face, Tae Jin decided to drop the act. He directly put Kyung's phone in the safe and revealed his thug-like demeanor, satisfying their curiosity. "Before you get arrested, ask whatever you want." Surely, what they were most concerned about was their friend's death. But before asking about that, Kyung wanted to know why their friend had been selling drugs. It turned out their friend once had a daughter who was suffering from a serious illness and needed a lot of money for surgery. Coupled with the heir wanting to control their friend, he deliberately arranged for people to block his insurance money, leaving him with no choice but to agree to Tae Jin's request to sell drugs. However, when faced with the question of whether he had killed their friend, Tae Jin countered by asking Kyung why he didn't think their friend had committed suicide. "When our friend fell, he was still wearing shoes." This loophole left Tae Jin helpless, instantly erupting in fury, blaming himself for being stupid enough to put the shoes back on the 9th floor. Clearly, only a few people would choose to take off their shoes when committing suicide. "You're right, I killed your friend." Although they had both guessed that Tae Jin was the killer, guessing and hearing him admit it himself were two completely different things. Tae Jin was currently basking in his utter arrogance, completely oblivious to the change in their expressions, so he continued to boast about his achievements. He not only believed their friend had brought it upon himself but also took pride in his perfect plan. He even bragged about his friend's wife, claiming that with just a few tricks, he easily stole her away. Such insults to the deceased were already hateful enough, let alone when the person was a longtime friend of both of them. The next moment, the head of research fired a shot, killing Tae Jin. Finally, all the evildoers were punished. After a month of treatment, Kyung regained his composure and visited the head of research in prison, the person who had harmed him and got him involved with drugs. I heard that I used your gun to commit a crime, causing you to be demoted. Now, Kyung didn't want to dwell on the unpleasant past. The reason his gun was in the head of research's possession was that the scarred man had used it in exchange for a ticket to escape on the ship. The head of research didn't feel any remorse, so when their meeting ended, he revealed the first 4 digits of the secret account's password to Kyung. 0617. This action was clearly meant to keep Kyung unsettled. Fortunately, Kyung wasn't greedy. Even though he knew the first 4 digits, he didn't have any intentions. But this peace was shattered when there was an anomaly in their friend's autopsy report. Under your friend's fingernails, we found this person's DNA. This man was the chairman of the conglomerate's personal assistant. Although Tae Jin had confessed to killing their friend, when their friend fell, the assistant was in the elevator with the others. This meant he had an accomplice. But the chairman's assistant wasn't someone Tae Jin could casually order around. So even though the assistant confessed that it was Tae Jin's instruction, Kyung didn't believe him. He immediately went to the chairman's house, handed over his phone and watch, and asserted that he wasn't recording before starting to inquire. It turned out that Kyung wasn't from an ordinary background but was a true blue blood. That was why the chairman agreed to meet him. But that didn't mean Kyung could extract any information because the age and status gap between them was too vast. However, the chairman's comment about the assistant's actions revealed a loophole. My assistant has always been so dedicated. He even thought of taking off the shoes to make it look like a suicide. This statement reminded Kyung of what he had said before, that taking off shoes to commit suicide was unnecessary because most people who wanted to take their own lives wouldn't bother with that. Yet, the chairman considered taking off the shoes a very subtle detail. This meant the person who had instructed the assistant to put the shoes back on the 9th floor was the chairman himself. To force him to confess, Kyung used a tactic of provoking his pride, repeatedly using words to challenge his ego. Finally, the chairman couldn't hold back and spoke up to defend his honor. I orchestrated everything. Although the chairman quickly realized he had misspoken, but knowing Kyung wasn't recording, he decided not to deny it any further. He admitted that initially, it was Tae Jin who pleaded for his help, and he had only instructed his assistant to help Tae Jin complete the plan. After saying that, the chairman hastily saw him out. Seeing this, Kyung took out a recording device from his pocket. The final criminal had been caught. Because their friend was determined to have been murdered, Kyung and Yun Jin each received 2.5 billion won from the life insurance payout. When the two of them and their friend went to the beach to reminisce about the past, the friend accidentally mentioned that their friend had sought him out on July 24th of last year and reminded them that it was the anniversary of their friendship, which they had chosen together back in their school days. Hearing this, Kyung and Yun Jin hurriedly opened the secret fund's website. Yun Jin entered Kyung's first 4 digits, 0617, then their friend entered 0724. At this moment, everyone was extremely nervous because the amount in the secret fund was 5 trillion won, while there was only one attempt at the password. If they guessed wrong, this 5 trillion won would be permanently locked. Finally, Yun Jin decided to press enter. As expected, they had entered it correctly, successfully receiving the insurance money left by their friend.
The movie has come to an end. Leave your comments about the next movie you want to see recaps. Please press the subscribe button on the screen. Then click on the right window to watch the latest movie I want introduced to you.